So welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining me again today. Hi, Jessica. Now we can see you. So I think you can all unmute yourself. I am glad to see all of you so that means I didn't scare you off too much last week. So today, just a little explanation of what we're going to go over is I'm going to make sure that we are all feeling equipped to have effective and constructive, positive conversations with all of the young people in your life. So we'll cover preparation and the best approach to these conversations. We'll cover the essential topics that you need to have with essential conversations you need to have with your kids, and some tips for really resistant teens. And I'm also going to share with you healthy resources, which, by the way, that grows all the time. So you can always check in on my website and email me or ask me, because I'm constantly updating that. I just found a great website today through Cal State Long Beach that has amazing resources for parents. So I'm going to find a way to put that into the resources list as well. But I just wanted to open today by asking everyone, did they have any reflections, some initial thoughts, maybe some things that came to you this week regarding the workshop last week?
Paid more attention to lyrics of songs a lot.
Well, that's good.
Listening a lot more to what the lyrics actually were.
And looking them up, right? Like,
Yeah.
That's always surprising to me, because sometimes I'm like, that's horrible. And my son's like, what? And I thought it said something that it absolutely did not say. So sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, you win that one. Anyone else? Did anyone think about or give any thoughts to what is the biggest hurdle to having these conversations with your kids? I'm going to share with you. I just had this thought today because I got really upset yesterday. I was watching, I don't know if you guys saw Childhood 2.0. It's a documentary. It's really eye-opening, but the first half of it is all about technology, and then obviously the second half they get into pornography, and it's like the same stuff that I'm talking about here. But you know, I feel like I'm so proud of all of you because you're here, because there's so many people who just have no idea how to do this. And I'm going to be completely honest. There's a lot of times I said to my friend, because, well, I'm going to go over like what is just come to me in the last month, but I'm not sure that what I'm doing is going to save my children, right? Because this is uncharted territory. We've never been in this position before. And the only thing that we can do is make sure that our kids are constantly communicating with us, and we're communicating with them, and that when we're seeing things, we're talking to them about it, and that we have good resources to get information. But honestly, I mean, there's so much, they're so inundated with this information. So I'm just going to give you a little story. A friend of mine, son has a porn issue. They've been dealing with it, took everything off of his phone. He was not grounded because, the porn industry, as we talked about last week, is really actually looking for your kids. So, that felt like a punishment, where it was more like, listen, we have to help you to help yourself. So we're going to take all of these, potential like pitfalls off of your phone, and realize that he was still able to access all of them in a hidden part of his phone. So it's really hard to deal with this. It takes a village. It takes all of us looking out for, each other's kids, and being really aware that those things can happen. As much as you try to put filters on, or take things off your child's phone, or limit their access to their phone, they still have the ability to go around you to find a way. They know more than we know. So just realize that you know, this is not a perfect solution, but it's the best solution. And I will also point out that as far as porn goes and all of those things, what's really interesting to me is I talk to some of the best experts in the country about this stuff, and there is no resource for middle school kids to help them deal with porn addiction. And to me, that's really sad. And I don't call it porn addiction. I mean, I would say porn consumption habit, something like that. But there's no place for kids to go. So even the experts are still trying to figure out, how do we reach this demographic? How do we make this better? So just know that you are here, you are doing the best that you can, and it's a somewhat solution to an imperfect, situation that we're all being put in. But like in the last month, I just wanted to point out, there was like, this is so common. If it's your child, if it's your friend's child, like, I always try to remove all shame, because with in all honesty, in 1 month I had a boy who got scammed. These are either friends of mine or people that have reached out to me because they don't know what to do. Friend of mine, or a boy reached out, didn't know what to do. He had sent a picture of his penis. Someone asked for it online, and it had his face. And the people wrote to him and started bribing him for money. I have two girls that were sexually assaulted that have reached out to me in the last month. And this is all, I mean, I can trace all of this back to this more pornified, over hypersexualized culture. I also had a case come to my attention of child on child predation in the 6th grade. That's also a very common thing now, because kids see this and they're like concrete learners. So they see something and they want to enact what they saw, or work out, what is it that I'm seeing, and it's arousing to them. I mean, we can't deny that part of it. I also had a middle school girl who had sent a picture of herself naked that went around all of school. So all of these things in 1 month, it is getting more and more common. So I want to say that, like, as I say to my friends who come to me and talk to me about this, I talk to my children at least once a week about these topics. And I say that just because I think, Beth, last time, Elizabeth, you were saying that you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm saying this all the time to my kids. Is this like, am I like over the top? And I think that, I don't know what the exact balance should be. Your children, but I think that for me, I talk to them once a week, and it's not always about porn or whatever, but I always try to draw, if I can see where porn is influencing the behavior or something, I do try to point that out, because I want them to understand, and I also like to give them the contrast of how it was back in my day. For example, um, just a quick example, like this show, Childhood 2.0, they were showing how they had this older woman on who was talking about like dating someone, or when they used to court each other. And she was saying that, like, she never even kissed someone or went out on a date until she was in college. And that, that they never obviously had sex. And then you cut to these kids and they contrast it with what the children are saying. And the children are saying, we have sex and we do things before we actually have a relationship. And it's so backward that it's really important to point out to kids how it was even when we were younger. There's a guy, I think, I'll put it on, I'll send it in the link when I send out these safe resources, but he's the New Zealand dad. I interviewed them on my podcast, this dad from New Zealand. He does this really cute video where he talks to his daughter about mixtapes. And he says, when I was younger, when I had a girlfriend or I liked someone, I would create a mixtape for them. And all of those songs told her something that I thought about her, even though it was like kind of secrety, but it was like cool. Like, I thought about her. I wanted to be a good boyfriend to her. I wanted her to like me. I was trying to woo her. And he's like, and today you're getting a dick pic, pardon my French. And she's like, he's like, so I just want you to know, when someone sends that to you, that's like, that doesn't take any time, any consideration. It shows disrespect for you, but just showing the contrast so that they can sort of appreciate, like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like. Them, knowing, like, a lot of parents will go, well, I saw porn, right? The child then thinks, oh, my parents saw what I'm seeing. They don't know that. And the one thing that's super hard, I don't know if I mentioned this last week, sometimes I feel like I've said things to so many different groups of parents, but like, I say to my kids, dad is not choking me in the bedroom. I just want you to know that this is not healthy. Like when you see this, this is not what everybody does. So you need to understand this is a choice that people make. Some people would see this as, you know, disrespecting their body, and you have agency over your body. So you should know that that is not for everybody. You know, it might be popularized in porn. And so people feel pressure to do that. But there's a lot of people who choose not to do X, Y, or Z, whatever that happens to be. So so just going from there, I wanted to start at like, what is the approach that we should be taking? And I got a great bit of advice in one of the things I read years ago that said, keep a journal. And that would be the first thing that, well, actually, the first thing I would say is develop a game plan. So before you obviously can do this journal, because I'll tell you how to do that in a second, get educated. I'm going to talk about the different things you need to talk about with your kids, but get it educated before you dive in. Do research, not just so you know, but also so you've talked to your partner, whoever is going to be raising or talking to your kids about this. Like in my family, pretty much I am the educator. My husband doesn't do it. So he's got to toe the line that I set, but you know, it's not really like, I'll say every once in a while, I'll be like, you have to like jump in here. He's not great at doing it. It makes him really uncomfortable. So I would say, you know, you should know who your partner is first. Make sure you know what roles you're each going to play. Sometimes the dad is better at, you know, talking to, you know, the sons. But I would also say that it's really important for not just the dads to talk to the sons, but the dads to talk to the daughters, because the dads have obviously an insight to boys that the moms don't have, and the dads also can show this is how I respected girls, you know, and this is what's important. So kind of you have to
This is
come
something you should listen to. I've already listened to it.
you come to an understanding with your partner. The other thing is, if you don't feel like you are capable of having these conversations, because there's some people who are just like, I can't. First, I want to encourage you that yes, you can, but maybe there's something that feels really uncomfortable to you. That is something that maybe you could find a friend who feels okay in talking about. I had a friend who was able to have a lot of
Like it's live
conversations.
right now.
A lot of she was able to have a lot of conversations with her daughter, but when her daughter was going to have sex with her boyfriend, the mom was like, oh my gosh, I know that so and so is an expert on like teen sexuality. And so she put her together with a woman, and that woman asked her some really important questions that maybe would have been awkward for the mom to have. So just because you can do some of the conversations doesn't mean you'll be able to do all of them. But I promise you that if you start when they're young, those conversations, probably you'll be able to handle all of them. So strategizing with your partner, who's going to give the talks? Are you on the same page? What are your values about certain things? You know, I was really surprised when I said to, when I was started talking to my husband, who grew up in a very liberal home, about the Norwegian way, which is that they allow their older teenagers to have sex in their house. They don't just allow them to have sex with anybody, but it's really built on this idea of healthy sexuality, healthy relationships that that they have built sort of into their educational system and into their family structure. And when they feel like someone has been part of the someone has been like a boyfriend has been part of the family unit for a while, or a girlfriend, they've had dinner with them and they know that the relationship is getting serious, the parents will often let them have sex in the house, because they feel like that makes it safer. It makes, you know, it doesn't remove the parents from the conversation. You know, they're not obviously going to discuss everything with them, but they feel like when the kids have problems, they'll come to them. Because what they've found in the United States is most kids avoid relationships with their parents when they get to a sexual point in their relationship with their significant other. And the reason that they do that is shame. They don't want to enter the conversation with them. And so the parents in Norway have seen like, in Norway have seen that this creates a divide. I mean, psychologists say this creates a divide with the kids and the parents, and the way to keep them together and in the conversation, in the discussion, is to, some of them, actually it's pretty common to give them those that they're being able to have sex in the home. So developing the game plan is really important, and making sure that you have the resources before you enter the conversations. Then keeping a journal would be the second bullet point that I would say is really important on your approach before these conversations. I keep a journal and I write in there who I talk to about what and when. So a conversation about boundaries with a middle schooler is going to look different than a conversation about boundaries with a high schooler. So, obviously different topics at different stages, and, this at different stages, those topics differently. So you're just going to have to add more information. Do you need to clarify things, give more detail, add some stuff to it? And keeping notes also. So in my journal, I have every television show that I watch. If I see something that I'm like, oh, that's a really healthy relationship. Ooh, that's really unhealthy. I take notes, Outlander season 1, episode 3, healthy sexuality, because kids don't know. If you remember from last week, that's why they're going to these places, is because they want to see. They're concrete learners. They know, they've heard, or they think they understand what sex is, but they really want to see it. And if you watch Childhood 2.0, you'll see that a lot more with girls. Like the boys, I think, are a little bit more, driven by hormones and testosterone, but like the girls, these are girls in late high school, early college, and most of them are shocked to hear how much the boys have watched porn, because the girls curious also, but they're not going to the same place to get the information. But they do, knowing that there's healthy examples out there, we can sort of guide our kids. I always talk about Atypical. They had such beautiful relationships in that show. And I haven't watched Bridgerton, but supposedly healthy. I personally love Sex Education on Netflix. It's awesome if your kid is in high school. I think it's like by junior year, I think sophomore year, you could let them watch it. There's a lot of gratuitous sex in the beginning, like not a lot, but maybe like the first couple minutes, but it usually plays into the storyline. So it's, I guess, kind of gratuitous, kind of not. Anyway, so keep a journal. The third thing for your approach is just making sure that you're naming your values all along. Helping your children understand that the values behind your rules rather than just rules. So respecting space, when your kid is a toddler, if you're starting these conversations early, it's not screaming at a restaurant. Once they become, little kids, it's maybe, if someone's trying to sleep, you put your headphones on when you want to listen to music. And if they're teens, it's sharing the bathroom and keeping it clean. But how does that relate to intimacy? Then you can cross it over when you're talking about intimacy. And you would say, a lot of kids will have issues with younger kids, masturbation. There's a time and a place that, it's not for every place. So you're inserting like your values as it relates to sex along the way too, as it relates to, whether that's respect for shared space. Personal agency is one I think is really, really important and should start young, because I just haven't been able to figure out when parents say like, I know years ago, there was this woman who was kind of made fun of because she was like, oh, you should ask your baby when you're changing their diaper. And people were kind of like, oh, really? What's the baby going to say? And I actually have to say, I kind of like, so here's the thing is, when do you start? Like, what is the line where you say, oh, now I'm going to give my child agency over themselves? Like, if you just start from the very beginning, it kind of gets like built into their DNA as they grow that like, I have, power over what ultimately happens to my body, right? So we start that by saying like, I'm gonna, take you out of the tub now and dry your hair. And I'm sorry, is that rough? Like asking them is it okay with them? Is that too rough? Whatever. There's certain things they obviously can't choose. Like you can't choose to not maybe go to the doctor and get shots if you have to. But you can, let them know there's some things that we have to make decisions over, but really allowing them to have choices where they're able to. Um, Obviously, the big one is like, you don't have to hug someone if you don't want to. But in my own experience, I'll tell you this, because I'm big on saying like, oh, everybody has like the right to decide what works for them. And then my son got invited on a weekend with our friends, and I was like, oh, this is great. He's going to go away. But the day he was supposed to leave with them, he said, oh, I don't want to go. And I was like, well, you can't not go. Like they're waiting, like the kid is waiting for they're going to be so disappointed. And he was like, Mom, I really don't want to go. And he had to drive. And it was like when he first got his car, and it was like an hour and a half. And I'm like, are you nervous about the drive, or do you just don't want to go? He's like, it's kind of a little bit of both. And I was like, no, you have to go. They're going to be, and then I was like, wait a minute. I am pushing my child to do something that they don't want to do. So I had to take stock, and I was like, okay, you really feel like you don't want to go. This is not like a lame. And he's like, no, I don't want to go. I said, okay, fine. And then he came back and he's like, oh, Zach's mad at me because I didn't go. And I said, well, I want you to understand, people are going to be mad at you. When you disappoint people, they get upset with you, but you have to go with what your instincts tell you. It didn't feel safe to you. It didn't feel right to you. And I said, and I also want to point out something. One day you're going to be with a girl or a partner that isn't interested in something sexually that you want to do. And you're going to feel disappointed because you're going to be aroused by it, or you're going to think, oh, we talked about this and they said they were going to have sex with me and now they're not. And you're going to feel disappointed. But in the same way that Zach couldn't tell you and could be angry at you all he wanted, he didn't have a right to make you drive an hour and a half. In that same way, you have to remember and respect everyone else. So using all of the values all along the way, like remembering how to apply things that might happen in their future relationships to the things that are currently going on in their life at whatever stage they are. The other way that parents can really model this behavior is through Facebook postings, Instagram postings. I have a friend, I love her. She posts pictures of me all the time. I don't love the picture. And I'm like, damn it, do not post that picture. And I do it to my kids and I'm like, oh my God, she looks so cute. And then like my daughter's like, yeah, no, I don't like that picture of me. And I'm like, yes, no, you look so cute. And I'm like trying to convince her. And she's like, yeah, no, I don't. And so I have to go like, okay, I'm not going to do that. So that's another way to be modeling our values and calling them out, but call them out. That's the important part. Respect and responsibilities, boundaries, consent. How does that apply to love and intimacy? Obviously, we'll talk about boundaries, but that's an obvious one. But there's obviously boundaries with kids. I try not to hug my kids unless I ask them. I try to always be respectful, knock on the door when I'm going into their rooms. Having the conversation and naming the values helps your child to build critical thinking skills. It helps them to know what they are when they want to, when they're thinking through and trying to process, as we'll go through in a later exercise about boundaries, helping them to qualify what they are okay with and what they're not. Talking about these values really helps them there. The third thing I would say is start immediately. Obviously, I think I mentioned last week, most kids are open to their parents' input before the age of 13. Older teens really, like older, meaning older than 13, which are actually young teens, but by the age when they get to 13, they start to prioritize their peer approval versus what their parents have to say. The earlier you start, the easier it is. Communication with your child is, built small, and then you can get into the dicey conversations really much more simply. And I think I mentioned last week, but if you weren't here last week, is that, no time is too late. There is never a time that is too late to start these conversations. Again, friends who've started with their kids when they're 20 years old, and really it helped when all of their peers wanted them to stay dating someone who they were like, oh, she's hot. And he was like, yeah, but she's not really my person. And they didn't care. They were like, I would never give up a girl like that. She's hot. And he was like, no, that's not who I am. And the mom was able to say, he went to the mom, and the mom was like, you know what? You're not going to find the right person if you keep dating the person who's not right for you. So, she was glad that she was there. She was glad that those conversations started, and obviously it led to lots of other conversations as well. The other thing to remember in your approach is to stay calm. If your kids are coming to you, it is because they care what you think. And if I always tell people, like, if you panic, your kid then has to think, second guess themselves, or think maybe I should bring this to somebody else because my mom or dad can't handle this. And if you're not in the conversation, you can't help them. Again, like my my friend's son, you can't help them to prioritize their values and what they're looking for, because, they'll be prioritizing what their friends at school say. So when they come to you, I would say, I always start with a reaffirming kind of comment, saying something like, thank you so much for trusting me with this question, or thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. And then if it's something that I'm like, where in God's name did they hear that? And I'm in a panic state, I just go, so can you tell me a little bit more about what it is that you heard or what you want to know? Because you're trying to get a real picture of what it is that they're talking about, whether it's condoms, because maybe their friend is sexually active and not them. Or if it's, something about oral sex. I had my sister's neighbor was like, my kids came home and started asking about oral sex. They're in the 3rd grade. They heard it on the bus. So before you jump to conclusions, I would just say, can you tell me a little bit more about what you want? If you're in an appropriate place, I would then just talk to them straight facts. You obviously know, without going over, you'll know the age of your child, should you give them more information or less. But I will say this, there are a lot of sexuality experts who believe that kids should know everything, obviously not everything about sex, but they should know what intercourse is. They should know that there are different kinds of sex, not necessarily, you don't have to be really super graphic with them, but by the time they get to kindergarten, because they will hear things from other kids who have older siblings. And it's, if I didn't say this last week, you always want your kid to be the most knowledgeable one on the playground so that they have the right information. And once they get into a group of other kids, there's just too many possibilities that they could hear, from older siblings, etc. So giving them straightforward answers, and then talking about your family values as it relates to that. So there are, oral sex is something that people who are in a relationship do. In our family, we don't, you know, um, we don't have any type of sex until we're in, serious relationships, and, we're, older, whatever your family values happen to be, just try to, or we don't believe in premarital sex. Abstinence is totally a fine thing to tell them as well. But just know this, um, kids who are taught abstinence only education, studies have shown that only delays sexual intercourse by a year to 18 months. So that, while effective in the short term, in the long term, those kids tend to be the ones with more teen pregnancy. So it is really important, regardless of whether you're going to teach them. And I always say, like, can you teach them in the way that, like, I say things to my son? I hope that my son doesn't do certain behaviors, but by the same token, I have to make sure he has all of the information. So I'll say, listen, if your friends ever talk about this, I just want you to know the truth. I want you to know that this is what, like, every time you have sex, you need a condom and lubrication. I'll go into that in a minute, down in the list, but I'll say that to him. I'm like, if your friends are ever doing it, make sure that they know that they need condoms and they need lubrication, and here's why. So I'm like giving him the information. It's probably not for him, I'm thinking, but at least he's got the right information. again, acknowledging that you may not know everything, but this gives you the opportunity to go back to them. If they ask you something that you feel like, I'm in over my head, I got to ask somebody, just telling them, you know what, I don't have the answer for you right now, but I'm going to find out and I'm going to circle back to you. Always want opportunities to have conversations. So, any questions about this stuff so far? All good? Thumbs up? Yeah. Okay. The things that they need to know. Genitalia, properly identified genitalia. Super, super important. I'm going to start out with why for the youngest ones, it's really important. Properly naming genitalia has a way of helping kids avoid sexual abuse or stopping sexual abuse. Why? Because when we use proper names for the parts of their bodies, they have no, first, let's say, like when we properly name it, or when we don't name it, let's just say, because normally we'll say, oh, this is a leg, this is your arm, this is your hand, that's, your foofer. And they're like, okay, what? Like, they know everybody has a different name for it. And if we don't talk about it, it seems shameful or bad or like a secret. And we don't want them to feel that way. We want them to be able to know all about their body, what it's called, because if child abuse is happening, we want a child to be able to identify where they've been touched, how they've been touched, who touched them. There was a story that Amy Lang from Birds, Bees, and Kids talked about, where this little girl went up to her teacher and said, Grandpa's touching my cookie. And the teacher said, well, you have to share your cookie with people. We talked about sharing, that's important. And the little girl walked away. The next week she came back and she's like, Grandpa's touching my cookie again. Again, the teacher says the same thing. Third week, the teacher's like, this is weird. So she said, what exactly is your cookie? And she pointed to her vulva. So, when we don't have the proper names, like, we can't tell people who could help children that there's a problem. They could very easily say, don't tell your parents, but they didn't say, don't tell your teacher. And they go to tell the teacher. If you haven't given them the proper names, they can't tell the teacher by a proper name. And that's why one reason it's really important. Secondly, they've found that abusers are more likely to go away from a child when they know, you're not supposed to touch my vulva. Like, when they say specific terms and proper terminology, they know an adult is talking to that child. And if they know adult is talking to that child, they know the child is also talking to the adult. So they are less likely to abuse a child who has properly named their body parts. The other thing I want to talk about as far as properly naming genitalia, I would actually go above and beyond the talking, the properly naming genitalia, to say that we need to go counter to a toxic cultural message that says that there's something wrong with certain genitalia. There's always these what I call myths, or these stereotypes about, especially I feel like this is to female bodies. And I'm going to just tell you a story. I was taking my daughter to a concert. Did I tell you this story last week about taking my daughter to a concert? And all of her friends were in the back, and they started talking about DJ Khaled. If I told this story before, someone can just give me a thumbs down. They were talking about DJ Khaled and how he said he wouldn't go down on his wife. And I was like, okay, I'm not supposed to be listening, but I was. And I'm like, well, I don't get it. Why won't DJ Khaled go down on his wife? And they're like, well, these are 15-year-olds and about 5 of them. They're like, well, girls, like, vaginas are gross, they smell, they, all of this kind of stuff. And I was like, just floored. And I'm driving my car, I'm thinking, this is not good. This is not good. Like, these girls already feel like their bodies aren't worthy, aren't good, and it puts them at a disadvantage in a sexual situation. They feel like they're not deserving of pleasure, because why would someone pleasure them the way they're willing to pleasure, their partner, because it's all gross. So I had to be like, I'm out driving. I said, you know what? I'm going to tell you girls something. When you get home, I want you all to get out a mirror. I want you to look at your vulvas. I want you to know that babies come through them. They can give you major pleasure. They are beautiful. Every single one is different. There's not one that's better than the other. And that's what's amazing. They're like snowflakes. Every single one is different. Just like a penis, penises are a little bit more the same, but they're still all different. They might have things that are different from somebody else. And you never need to feel shame about them. They're not smelly. They're not dirty. And actually they're pretty cool. Like I'm like the clitoris has 8,000 nerve endings, and that is 4,000 more than the head of a penis. I'm like, so that is pretty amazing. And its sole purpose is to bring you pleasure. I'm like, that's the amazing things about the genitalia that you have. So don't ever be ashamed about it. And I'm like, as far as smell goes, men can smell, women can smell, it all can smell. It's dark, it's moist, and if you don't take care of it, it can smell. So I just want you to know it goes both ways. But I think we have to go a really long way to counteract and counter the toxic cultural messaging around vulvas. Penises are the same way. At this point, penises are really getting a lot of boys like uptight because of pornography. They're seeing these things. So I think it's really important that we have facts, facts about boys' penises. The average male penis is 5.14 inches. Those kind of really can help to make someone feel better. I actually, in one of my interviews with a porn star, the ex-porn star, she said all of the girls on the porn set were like, oh my God, the guys with the big penises, no one wanted to have sex with them. And so I will often, like in a group of boys, I'll say, you don't have to worry about it. Like even the porn stars were like, this is just too much, like, and it has nothing to do with it. If you actually know, there's studies that the happiest sexual relationships, sexually satisfying relationships, are among lesbians. That's the most satisfied demographic. And when you know that, they could be using a toy, but this is just, two people without a penis having sex, and they're the most sexually satisfied. So what does that tell you? But going to help them, because this is where a lot of the fear and the shame arises for kids. So I know that's obviously not when your kids are little, but just kind of always making those conversations natural, or hearing something like you will hear all the time on TV, like, oh, they'll talk about someone's, they not on TV, but like maybe Netflix, they'll say something. And it's really important that you give counter messaging to what the media is saying. Okay. And then, yeah, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, if you start young saying like these things, giving positive body messages to your children, obviously it's just an extra layer of armor against all of the things that the media and pornography is going to tell them down the road. So the next thing that you need to talk to your kids about is boundaries. Even as adults, we struggle with boundaries. I know I do. And it isn't sometimes until someone's crossed my boundaries too many times that I'm like, oh my God, that's like, I have to tell them about that, So I think there is hold on, I have it here on my desktop. One of the greatest lessons that I got on boundaries was from this woman, Anya Maines, and her website is in my resources, so you will get it. But I want to just show you this. I'm going to screen share with you the circles of comfort, which I know can be, let me just open this up. Sorry, I'm going to get to it. Screen share. Okay. So if you can see the circles of comfort in the middle, I actually did mine, so I'm going to like hold mine up. But I tried to put in the inside of the circle, the comfort zone, helping your kids to understand when they feel comfortable in a situation, how do they feel? I feel happy, I feel relaxed, I feel like I can laugh, I feel peaceful. That's how I feel when I'm comfortable, right? Outside that circle is the discomfort zone. what do I feel when I feel just like lack of comfort? I feel my palms get sweaty. I feel awkward. I feel nervous, embarrassed, anxious. Helping them to identify these feelings for your boundaries. And then outside here would be like more like a panic zone. It's hard to swallow. I have racing thoughts. I'm fearful. I'm worried, shame, a rapid heart rate, worried. Why is this important? This is really important because we want kids. I'll send you that too. So maybe you can, it's like an exercise you can work on with your kids. But we want kids to know that like there are reasons why we go outside our comfort zone. Sometimes we're growing, right? Like our coach is encouraging us to dive off, you know, a higher dive, or we're just trying something new. We're experimenting with food, whatever it happens to be. There's reasons, you know, maybe we're doing a speech at school, something like that. But there's reasons that we can go outside of our comfort zone into this discomfort zone. Um, but it's really important to know that we do have a boundary that we can't, that we, you know, don't cross, or when we cross that boundary, this is how I feel. Why? Because a lot of times kids will be pushed by their partner or by their friends into the discomfort zone. And I think it's really important to get your kids to ask themselves, am I going outside my comfort zone for my benefit? Or am I going outside my comfort zone for your benefit? So if I'm doing something sexual and I'm being pushed outside my comfort zone, you know, you have to question why that is. And when you get into a place where you really don't feel safe, what does that feel like? Fear, panic, anxiety, whatever that happens to be. The more aware they are of how they feel in those different zones, the more they're able to recognize them early and stop something that might lead them to a place of, you know, something happening where they don't, you know, they're not happy about it. They're, you know, God forbid, assault, anything like that. So, with boundaries, it's really good to give them kind of like exercises just to think about, even if you just name those things. You know, I had never done it until I did that thing, and I was like, wow, that's great. I love that exercise. And then I also learned of an exercise where it's columns of comfort. What are you okay with? What are you not okay with? Right? So it could be, I'm okay. Like my daughter just said to me, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that my friend didn't post any ugly pictures of me on my birthday. And I was like, yeah, like they're the kind of things you have to be able to know. Like, you know, when you're in healthy relationships, like these are the things that I am okay with you doing. These are the things I'm not okay with you doing. But just again, the more we exercise that muscle of writing down what we're okay with, what we're not okay with, that really helps us, especially in relationships later on. Deal breakers and deal makers. Like, this is what I'm okay with in a relationship. This is what I'm not okay with. Um, that would fall under that too. And then the other thing I say with boundaries is make sure you give your kids, like I think I mentioned this last week, an ace in their back pocket, something that they can say if they get to a place where someone is pushing them. Maybe it's texting you something if it gets them out of a sticky situation. Maybe they text you, I don't know, blueberries. And when you see that, you know that you have to call them and say, oh, listen, you have to come home. I'm coming to pick you up right away. Or, you know, you tell them, you know, like for my son with drinking and stuff, I'm like, listen, you never, when you go to a thing, sometimes it's hard. Someone's handing you a drink or they make you feel awkward. You can always say, I just had 2 drinks before I got here. I'm good for right now. Or, you know, I'm allergic to, who knows, I have a gluten allergy. I can't drink beer. Sorry, guys, you know, whatever. You can make up excuses and help them to have that, because getting caught off guard is often why kids do things, because they don't know how to say no. And then this is somewhat similar to the genitalia, but pleasure. So everyone thought the other conversations were challenging. Pleasure might be some people's worst conversation to have with their kids. Pleasure is such an important conversation. So Details Magazine in 2009 had an article called titled how internet porn is changing teen sex. And the first line said, there's an entire generation of young people who think that sex ends with a money shot to the face or ejaculation to the face. And I can tell you from the teens that I talk to, this is absolutely true. And I think that again, it's having that conversation with your kids and just saying, the most important part of um, intimate relationships are knowing that you are safe, that mutual pleasure is part of that you are being respected, that your boundaries aren't being crossed, enthusiastic consent, but pleasure is a huge part of it. Uh, girls and women especially need to hear this, because pornography is not really when I talk about pornography, I'm talking about free pornography online. It is not an exploration of genuine female pleasure. It's jackhammer penetration. It's it's girls who are acting like they're having orgasms even though they're being violated, things like that. And so if we never get beyond the uncomfortable conversations, of sex, if we don't make those conversations comfortable and we don't get to pleasure, we leave girls thinking, well, I guess this is what it is. Because let me tell you something I heard when I was a kid. Maybe you heard the same thing. The first time, or I heard, sex can be painful for girls. If anyone else heard that comment, no one else went beyond that for me. No one said, oh, that might be, it might feel uncomfortable, but you should talk to your partner and this is how you can make it better. And this is the way to, for it to be more pleasurable. No one bothered to have that conversation. So when we don't have these conversations with our daughters, we can leave them with the idea that sex is uncomfortable. There's a lot of talk about how many women are inorgasmic or have anorgasmia. The fact of the matter is, when they did studies, it's only 5% of women who aren't able to achieve orgasm. It's the same number of men. It's a little more for women, not much, like by 2 or 3%. But if you listen to the common narrative, you would think that women have less ability to have orgasms, or it's more common. Some things say it's 20%. That's not true. But if we leave girls without saying, no, this is, pleasure is what you're supposed to have when you have sex. And then how do you get there? Right? Like, so, okay, great. Like, it's supposed to be pleasurable. Listen, I'm not going to tell my children how to masturbate, but I always make sure that the conversation is not one-sided. I don't say boys masturbate. I say people masturbate because they're trying to learn about their bodies. And it's important that you understand your body. It's important that you're able to tell your partner what feels good. So, because it can be hard for your partner to figure out, especially girls. They're all different things turn us on. So, it's really good if you can sort of direct your partner. But if we don't, these girls are left to what pornography is feeding them: choking, slapping, domination by, usually the porn theme is an aggressive male and a, submissive female, jackhammer penetration. I mean, none of these things, even by, jackhammer penetration, may or may not even touch their clitoris. So they may never even experience pleasure. I think I told you in the last week that I interviewed a boy who I just posted the podcast, and he told me that he had sex with his girlfriend for 3 hours every time, and that his girlfriend would complain that it hurt, and could she just hold on for him? And I'm like, okay, someone needed to talk to him and someone needed to talk to her. So the conversation of pleasure is really, really important for boys to understand that what they're seeing, if they've seen porn, is not a true depiction. And for girls to understand that that may not be what gets them pleasure, and that masturbation is healthy. I will also tell you this little aside story is I did an interview with a girl named Maddie. She's actually trans. And she told me a story when she was identifying as a gay man, because pornography is so toxic, especially for the Q plus community, that what she saw. So, all right, most pornography is created by straight men. Um, so their narrative is aggressive male, submissive female. When they have two men, what they do is they make them both uber aggressive. So the sex, the gay sex, male sex that they portray is very aggressive, very violent, heightened. You know, I haven't seen a ton of gay male sex porn, but Maddie had, because again, small town in Michigan, she had nowhere to learn about what it looked like for gay people to have sex. So that was what she knew. So she started dating this guy, and when they actually got together, he was 4 years older than her. I think she was 15, he was 19. They were at a party, and he said, "Do you want to go upstairs?" She was like, "Okay." Obviously, at that time, identifying as male, and he raped her, and she didn't even know. That actually made me cry. She didn't even know that she was sexually assaulted. She said, "Because Stephanie, it looked like what I saw. I never saw the person in pornography. I never saw the guys like agree to anything. I just saw them roughly going for what they wanted and getting it." And she's like, "So that's what happened to me." And it wasn't until a police officer came and told her that they were arresting that guy, and that some of people in the community had suggested that maybe she was also violated by him, that the police came to her, and she then gave the story to them, and they said that's actually rape. So she didn't even know. She didn't even know. So when she told me that, not only was I so sad for her, but I was also sad because I thought, how many females don't even know what's going to happen, and this is what's being, shown about them. So important to talk about the pleasure. And then the next conversation you need to have with them is about pornography for exactly this reason. People look at porn because they're curious about bodies, and that's totally obviously normal. But there's better places to find healthier information. Again, I will give you, if you check back in with me, I'll give you resources. I'm creating that for the different shows. I'm asking my daughter to give me books and all of that kind of stuff that have really healthy recommendations. Pornography does not depict real sex. It's important that you share that with them. It's like learning to drive by playing, like, Forza Horizon. You're not actually driving a car. This is not actually the way that people have sex. If you feel comfortable enough sharing that, like, a lot of the things that maybe people talk about is not something that everyone does, and that this is just sort of like heightened, fantasy, um, and that your brain can become dependent upon pornography, and real partnered encounters will not be as fulfilling. Let them know that aside from sex, porn portrays women, the LGBTQ plus community, and minorities in very demeaning ways. And it has been shown to impact habitual users' ideas about these groups in very negative ways. And that porn changes also the way their bodies work. And that, I feel, interestingly, when I talk in schools, the thing that high schoolers I think resonates the most with them is letting them know that porn capitalizes on vulnerable persons. So sex trafficking, and all of that kind of stuff. If they're older, you can bring that in, that the people that are in that are often, trafficked, as I showed you last week, even the Pornhub scandal that came out in December. The other thing I would discuss with them is appropriate behavior. Obviously, you have to talk about these things, sexting, etc., sharing personal information and images online. They can never be retrieved. There's no guarantee of privacy. When we send these images, we relinquish control to another person, and possibly, social platforms. These social platforms are constantly changing their user agreements, and they are able to decide sometimes what to share of other people's images. So they never have any control once it's on a social platform. There's also should be conversation about legal ramifications. I have had, as you can imagine, I've had this conversation a lot of times with my kids, but even just last night, my daughter said, "Well, what if there was something about," we were talking about the scandal that I told you about, the middle schooler who sent this picture of herself and it went around school. And I said, that's distribution of child pornography. And she's like, but she took it of herself. She sent it around. How is that? And I said, you cannot, it's absolutely illegal to have a picture of someone under the age of 18 who is naked and share it. If you receive it, you're in ownership of child pornography. If you send it out, you are distributing child pornography. End of story. I mean, there have been cases where kids have, I don't know if they actually had any juvenile detention time, but I know that there was a big court case about it. Saying that that went too far, but certainly they're trying to make that very clear that they cannot take pictures or send them or receive them or share them amongst their friends. Yeah, so and the last conversation that I think is really important to have with kids is safe sex. And safe sex, obviously everyone goes like, oh, that's like everybody wants to talk about safe sex. I kind of think safe sex in a different way. Like, yes, they have to know about sexually transmitted diseases. And I would definitely go over those things. A lot of kids, because anal sex is such a huge um genre on Pornhub. It is always in like the top 10 categories. So it seems like every person is having anal sex. I do like to tell them that, if it has the last name sex, it's sex in our family. And that just because you have anal sex, just because you haven't had vaginal penetration, that's still considered sex. So all of the things apply. You always have to have safe sex. And that means, using protective barriers and going over what those protective barriers are. I mean, I could probably ask for a show of hands here. Who knows how to use a dental dam? Nobody. I had to do my own research on this. But yeah, like things like that. Cause I'll say that to kids. They'll be like, yeah, we know about condoms and dental dams. They've never seen a condom put on. This is, middle school, young teenagers. They've never seen how to use a condom and they have no idea. They know that a dental dam is there. They have no idea what it is. So even just familiarizing yourself with what they are, because, HPV in the throat, helping them to understand that, you know, um, pornography will never show you condoms or dental dams, but it is an essential part of sex, of safe sex. And that, remember, if a child is watching pornography, and we're talking like a high schooler, if they've watched pornography for a while, they've watched years of people having sex without condoms, without dental dams, without all of these, without lubrication, without all of these things. So they don't, they might hear it, but when you're having hot sex or you're having great sex, you don't have time for condoms or you don't use condoms, right? So you have to always stress that it can be, it can be something that, is part of the fun. Again, you're going back to the pleasure, but you have to have those conversations because porn hasn't given you the ability to check out of this conversation, right? um so you know Peggy Peggy Ornstein is the woman I was telling you earlier. Her friend had her took her friend's daughter out when her friend's daughter was about to have sex with her boyfriend, and she said, listen, I just want to go over a couple things with you. And I would call this under the safe sex conversation. She would say, um, are you and your partner able to have really easy conversations? Do you feel bad about saying anything? Does he respect what you're telling him? Do you talk about boundaries and things like that, and are they respected? Yes, that's safe sex. um, have you talked about your yes, no's, and maybes? I think that's a really important part of sex. So yeses are the things that I'm saying right now, I'm going to feel. You always have to get continuous uh, consent, but these are the things I'm good with right now. If I say no down the road, you're going to have to stop. But like, these are the things I'm telling you. These are the things I might be into, but we have to really check in with each other. And these are my absolute no's. I'm definitely not into doing this. So have you established those yes, no's, and maybes? Are you able to share concerns with them? And are you able to achieve are you able to achieve sexual satisfaction without your partner? So do you know your body before you're expecting your partner to know? So all of those things, I would say, I consider those in the safe sex conversation. You're obviously going to talk about STIs. You're obviously going to talk about the things, but I want to say for parents who don't know, a lot of kids that I hear from, what do they call anal sex? I think they call it, I don't know, they have some they have some funky term for it that basically means like, I'm still a virgin, So they don't consider anal sex. When I tell them anal sex is you are 13 times more likely to contract a sexually transmitted disease from anal sex than you are from vaginal penetration. So they have no idea. I also tell them that you have to have a condom on every time you have anal sex. You can't get pregnant, but again, transmission of diseases is so much more easy through anal penetration, and lubrication is an absolute must. So when I first heard that, I'm like, vaginal, but yes, because the friction, there's way less friction, so there's less chance of condoms breaking. So if they understand that like water-based lubricants are usually the best and the safest depending on the type of condom, but for latex condoms, they want water-based. So just helping them to understand that you can't use olive oil, you can't use coconut oil, you can't use, all of these things are a no. You need to use actual lubricant, and that actually makes using condoms, according to studies, more pleasurable even for men. More pleasurable for women, more pleasurable for men. So, and there was one other point to that, which is, I'll think of it. I'll come back to it. Anyway, any questions before we get to resistant teens? We all good? This is the quietest group ever.
Mhm.
Okay, so resistant teens. The best way that I have found to deal with resistant teens is, if a kid is not going to even come in the room, they're not going to allow you in the room. I can't make a suggestion for that, but most kids, you can say to them, listen, I need you to just sit down with me 10 minutes a week. It doesn't matter what age they are. I have some things, I should have been talking to you about this all along. I really feel badly that I've missed some of these big conversations we were supposed to have. But if you'll sit down with me for 10 minutes every Wednesday, here's an egg timer. You don't have to say anything back. You don't have to reply to me. You just have to hear what I'm going to say. And then, if whatever, we'll sit down. And what we've found is that after 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, the kids will give a reply to the parents. But that 10 minutes is really essential in making it sort of a regular thing. They definitely loosen up, and it definitely, it pushes you a little bit in the beginning because it's hard to have those conversations. But for you, even those conversations get easier. I always try blaming it on a friend. I blame it on, oh, so-and-so told me that this happened. Sometimes I just make stuff up just because I'm like, I got to find a way to have this conversation, and I'll just make up like that a story was related to a friend, whatever. And, I'll use that as an opportunity to share a story that happened, so that they are, kind of engaged, and they don't think that you're talking to them. Like when kids feel like it's about them. For example, my friend was concerned that her daughter was having sex with her boyfriend, and she was like, every single time the daughter's like, "What? I am not having sex with him. Why do you keep having these conversations with me?" And I was like, "Oh, like I get that she's the only one in a relationship in your house, but you really have to make it to all of the kids. Like they're all like within 2 years of each other, so they're all teenagers." I'm like, you kind of have to say like, "Oh, I had this conversation with so and so. I'm having it with you. This came up, so I wanted to talk to you about this," because it's when kids feel like it's about them or you're judging their relationship with somebody, they tend to get more shut down. So making it about somebody else tends to help a little bit. And the other thing is let someone else educate them. My kids have to hear from me all the time when I have the opportunity to show them a TED Talk, to share with them, and a lot of these things you will find in the resources list that I send you. There's probably 10 or 12 TED Talks listed. But from TED Talks to just Justin Baldoni has healthy relationship, or what it means to be a guy. Like he did a TED Talk called Man Enough. And he's like, I'm tired of trying to be man enough. And he actually created this group of 5 or 6 famous celebrities, men, that he invited to dinner. And they did, I think, 4 installations of this Man Enough, where they talked about all of these men issues, which obviously relates to sex in a lot of ways. It's the communication, it's how they want to be perceived, it's body image, it's all of that kind of stuff. So anything where I can get somebody else to teach my kids and it's not coming from me is one of the best ways that I've found. Shooting them, these, I think I told you last week about amaze.org, shooting them a video and just saying, hey, we're going to talk about this. And all I say is, do you have questions? And the thing to remember is they don't have to agree with you, but as long as you're, sending it out to them, you're entering into a conversation, it helps them to sort of clarify what they feel about certain things. And one of the greatest conversation starters that I've found for pornography, because I know that's one of parents' biggest fears, is the porn conversation from middle school on. I would say you could watch Brain Heart World Together by Fight the New Drug. It's a great 3-part documentary series that talks about how pornography impacts your brain, your heart, meaning relationships, and the larger community. Any questions? We reached the end. Jessica, anything?
I got a question.
Yeah.
You've given us lots of information.
Yeah.
And sort of a stepwise, but is there age appropriate steps? In other words, if you're talking to a 10-year-old as opposed to a teen or what have you, I assume there's a
Yeah.
gradual, I don't want to use the word, I guess I will use the word, a gradual escalation of
Yeah.
what you're doing. How do you start off with a 8-year-old?
So if you're going to talk about pornography, so everything is a little bit different. On my website, I tried to break things down by, there's like young people, then there's like middle school, and then high school. Every stage, obviously, I have books that I recommend for consent, for example. There's great books for little kids, middle school kids, and high school kids on consent. And they're great. Parents obviously read along and they see where they need to be in that stage of conversation. A lot of that is obviously, so this is like thinking. You have to see what the things that are influencing them, and you have to realize that they do learn these things earlier than you think that they're learning it. But for, like I said, as far as what kids need to know about sex, I would say that they do need to know about pornography. First, they need to know about pornography when they're young. So you're saying to them, if you ever come across anything online where someone's wearing less than what you would see them in on the beach, let dad and I know, because we're going to come and we're going to help you, or mom and I know, and we're going to come and we're going to, take care of the computer so that you don't have to get to that. Because accidental exposure is really one of the worst things, right? You don't want them to have it ever, but you certainly don't want them to have it young. So you want to try with the filters. But you also have to let them know this is like the internet, you can see anything. And if you see that, come let us know. But beyond that, then you have to be helping them to understand what pornography is, all of the falsehoods, all of the, myths that are created by the time they're in middle school. Because in middle school, it ramps up. I mean, the childhood 2.0, so here's the problem. There's no real concrete studies about when kids first access pornography. We have to go by self-reporting of these kids, right? But most kids that I talked to say that they got it around 9, 10. By the study, it says that, 22% of all porn traffic is going to children under the age of 10. So that gives you an idea. By the time they get to middle school, they need to understand pornography, what it is, why it's bad, how it's impacting them. They should know all about sex before they get to kindergarten. But, there are different books. I would say there's a great book, Talk to Me First, which is Deborah Rothman. There's so many great books. There's a great book called Sex by Heather Crean, who has Scarlet Teen. If you go to Scarlet Teen, a lot of times they have it broken down. I would say if you're looking for actual stages for younger kids, I would say that there's like websites that I always think of, like they're kind of like specializing young kids. And I would say that's Amy Lang. Her website is, and again, it's in my list of references, but resources. It's Birds, Bees, and Kids. And she kind of goes through all of those younger kid conversations. And then I'd say middle school, Scarlet Teen, middle school and college, Scarlet Teen. It gives kids all kinds of information. I mean, honestly, kids kind of have to know everything at this point by the time they get to high school. They really do. They need to know all about porn in middle school, and they need to know all about sex by the time they're freshmen in high school, how that can impact them. They obviously, all along, you're teaching them consent and boundaries. That's from birth to the time they leave for college and beyond. They always have to know about consent and boundaries.
Well, I have a lot of work to do.
You know what? It's ongoing. That's the good thing. No matter what age. I mean, my daughter, I started with her when she was 16. My son was 13, and my other daughter was 10. So they all got it at different stages.
Stephanie, obviously, you're an expert.
Thank you, Sol.
And 5 minutes with you is worth as much as sometimes reading a book. And I was thinking that I assume that, I guess I'll ask the question, that let's say my daughter is dealing with her daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and she needs support from somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you do as a business?
Yes. So what I should say is I do for all of my friends. I get calls. What I'm finding, because my big push is for middle school and high school, this is a really tricky age. I think I started saying in the beginning, the Meadows is like the one place that deals with adults that have issues with pornography. There's really no one. I mean, I actually had a really great conversation with the head of the Meadows, and we're going to do a podcast together because they're creating an adolescent program. Obviously, we want to step back from a kid having a porn consumption issue, and that will come, like, we can pull back from like what they're going to be teaching them, but that doesn't exist. It like I said, this is the Wild West. So I have people that come to me and I just try to help them get to the right place. So for how to have these conversations, yes, I'm absolutely the person to talk to. For a child who has a porn consumption issue, a significant one, that's a little bit harder. That's obviously above my pay grade, and I can recommend people, but I can tell you that even the people that people recommend don't even consider themselves like an expert in the field, because it's really becoming a bigger and bigger issue.
Stephanie, can I just share one thing that I hear most common in
Please.
my work with young adults is that, and you touched on it a little bit, is that in talking to our own kids about boundaries, sometimes what we have either been told as parents or like what's been available to us is to do like the stranger danger, kind of talk. And one of the things that's not talked about is boundaries with your intimate partners.
Mhm.
And so, and you had talked about this idea of like things you're maybe comfortable with, definitely not comfortable with.
Yeah.
But one of the things I have to, I mean, even in my own practice, I'm seeing so much of, and it's like heartbreaking. These kids are so young, but in middle school and in high school, tons of issues with kids, um, either mostly sending pictures and or videos, but they'll say, but we were dating, or but I sent it to my boyfriend, or I sent it to my girlfriend, because, we don't talk about like having, we talk about boundaries with strangers, and
Yes.
but they'll say, well, I mean, and I've had 2 or 3 instances just this year of videos being taken while they're being intimate and the female not being informed, and then it being passed around the football team or the school or the neighborhood. And I mean, it's unbelievable. So, or just asking for a picture and saying, but like, I felt like it was okay. It was my boyfriend. It's a
Yeah.
picture, but he's my boyfriend. It's not
Yeah.
a stranger. And then, 2 weeks later, they're not dating and it's not your significant other.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that boundaries question. I think sometimes we're only equipped or we're kind of encouraged as parents to set it with strangers.
Hmm.
And I felt like that was something I needed reminders of, that boundaries with intimate partners, or boyfriends and girlfriends and partners in high school, and even in middle school, I guess,
Yeah.
is something that I'm hearing more and more of.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I had a girl who just told me that two stories. She told me that her boyfriend had encouraged her to take a video of them, and didn't find out until someone on her campus came up to her and said that they saw her on Pornhub, that the boyfriend had uploaded it to Pornhub, and she was still dating him. he he didn't he didn't even have that respect for her while they were together. And then I had another girl who, and I think this is an important thing to remember. And when you understand escalation and how the brain works, it was like why I was able to in this moment say to this girl, who was this really smart, really awesome, accomplished college girl, who was gorgeous and could have dated anybody. Her boyfriend had asked her to send nudes. And she's like, well, I never really sent nudes, but he told me that it was going to stay between us. And I was like, and I said, well, so why did you send it to him? She said, well, because he's away, and I don't like him watching porn. And I thought, well, I'll do this for him because it'll give him something to remind him of me. And I said, oh, I need you to understand something really important. Your picture got him aroused for about 3 minutes. And then he had to open 20 other screens in pornography to keep his arousal going. He's not satisfied with one picture of your leg spread. And now your leg spread is out there and could potentially come back to haunt you. So I think girls actually believe, and remember the advertisement that I showed you guys last week for Mitchum? If you convinced her that it's for your private collection, you're a Mitchum man. This happens all the time. Oh, it's just for me. I'm not going to share it. I'm not going to. First of all, it's not even going to satisfy them sexually. And you don't have any control over it after that. You should just consider that that is going to be out there. So, but I think girls really want to believe, and I hate to say like, make this very like male female, but girls are a little bit more, I think, naive about these things. And they really are believing that these boys are telling them the truth, or that their partner is telling them the truth. And I just feel like, it's really helpful for us to not be afraid to have even that conversation with our daughters. Like girls, everybody who watches porn, it changes your brain. You escalate into needing more. That picture isn't going to do it for them. Don't be tempted. Don't fall in the hole. But yes, it is important that the boundaries are established. There is again, it's on my resources. His name is Al Vernaccio. He did an amazing TED Talk. I don't know if you saw it, but he talks about how sex, we always talk about sex like our generation, every generation before this one, and even this generation, about like the way that we say it's like baseball, right? Like first base, second base, third base. It's always like someone is winning, someone is being conquered. That's always the terminology that we use too. But he's like, I want you to think about a new metaphor for sex. It's like pizza. He's like, when you go out to get pizza with your best friend, you say, hey, what do you want on your pizza? Like if your friend doesn't like onions and pepperoni, but likes mushrooms and so do you, you're going to get a mushroom pizza. You don't order pepperoni and onions, you have to order what both of you will enjoy together. So whatever your sexual tastes are doesn't necessarily mean, again, platinum rule versus golden rule, do unto others as they want done unto them, right? Like they like mushrooms, not pepperoni and onions. So we're doing with other people what brings them pleasure and happiness, as well as us. It's a mutual decision that we're making. So they are the boundaries. That is like, if kids think about it that way, oh, just because you like something doesn't mean you get it when you're with this person, right? Anyone else? Well, I am here for any of you, as Sewell asked, I'm here for any of you to reach out to me if you have any questions, if you want to go over more than this and just talk about like what you need to know, or something comes up, I'm more than happy to, give you my time. And I will follow up with this. The only thing I ask, I'm going to send you resources. They're awesome conversation starters. The only thing I want to ask is if you will just give me feedback. If you thought there was something I could have added, if I talk too fast, if it's like a fire hose in your face, I don't care. Whatever it is that can help me grow and make this better, let me know. And there will be resources for you.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
so
Thank
Thank you
much.
very much.
Does wait, I have to ask you, Elizabeth, does your thing say St. Joseph's Prep
It does.
in Philly?
Yeah, that's where my son goes.
Oh, you're in Philly. Okay, okay, awesome. I used
Yeah.
to live in Philly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
Awesome.
have a sophomore there.
Cool. Awesome. All
Yeah.
right, well, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
Good
for
night,
your time. We
everyone.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.